Welcome to the Horizon Engage podcast, where we bring you expert opinion on geopolitical risk. Horizon Engage enables investors to make political and business decisions with confidence by providing global intelligence. I'm Joe Goldberg, CEO and founder of Horizon Engage, and today we are joined by my friend John Lowe, currently chairman of TC Energy and on the advisory board of Horizon Engage. Welcome, John.
Good morning, Joe. It's great to be with you.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you joining this morning. And let's go ahead and jump in. If you could give us just an overview of your background and experience for folks who haven't met you before, that would be great. And talk a little bit about the markets globally in which you've worked over the years.
Sure. I started my career back at Phillips Petroleum Company in 1981 and had different roles and responsibilities, normally on the financial side. Throughout most of my career, uh, Phillips did a lot of transactions before they merged with Conoco to create ConocoPhillips, and I was a part of all of that. And then ultimately, I mostly retired in 2008. My final role there was heading the E&P side of ConocoPhillips, but I stayed on as an advisor to ConocoPhillips. And then when we did the spinoff of Phillips 66 from ConocoPhillips, I came back and led that effort. I was fortunate enough to be asked to join the Phillips 66 board after the spinoff. I had already joined the Agrium board, and I'd been on the DCP Partners board and the Chevron Phillips Chemical board. And so I really transitioned into more board roles. After 2008, I also joined the Apache board. I chaired the Apache board through 8 proxy seasons. That's how I counted them. And then uh, I was on the Phillips 66 board uh, from its inception until this past May. And as you mentioned, that I continued to chair the TC Energy Board. So I've managed to enjoy kind of the entire hydrocarbon chain spectrum, and I would say I have certainly, as an employee, uh, worked in all areas around the globe. And um, certainly as a board member, you have little bit different lens of how you view everything. But uh, I still feel like it wasn't that long ago that I was an employee, so I kind of have the benefit of being able to look at things from both the employee view and the board member's view.
That's great. Thanks very much, John. I mean, really amazing background and experience. And over the years, we've talked a lot about different countries in which you've worked. And, even recently, I recall when I woke up on a Saturday morning and learned that President Maduro had been taken by U.S. forces. You were one of the first people I texted, and you immediately shared your first take on how U.S. oil companies and international oil companies were going to be looking at this potentially new Venezuela and new opportunities that were being discussed. And you came back with some really erudite thoughts and perspectives. In general, and in your experience, how have organizations traditionally managed political risk, and how have they gathered intelligence and uh, prepared their own analysis about what above ground issues they should be looking at and how they could work to mitigate some of those challenges in countries, as far flung as, let's say, Venezuela or Indonesia, Malaysia, Sub-Saharan Africa.
So I would say my viewpoint has changed from when I was a member of management to looking at things from a board member's perspective. I think when you're in management, you really you feel the pressure of how are you going to grow the company, how are you going to replace reserves, how are you going to earn high returns, and you're kind of in that go 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 um, philosophy and thinking. Whereas a board member, I think, uh, I mostly think about all the risks and how we're going to manage all the risks and how we're going to mitigate all the risks. It's like everything else, you can really overcomplicate things quickly. Um, uh, One of my favorite stories is when I first met you and Sasha, actually, as ConocoPhillips was thinking about how are we going to grow, and we were looking at opportunities in Russia at the time, early 2000s, and uh, I remember we had Dan Jurgen come in, and Dan, of course, is an expert, and he spoke eloquently for what seemed like hours about every possible angle we could view. And then we had another gentleman come in, Marshall Goldman, and he had a lot of things prepared to tell us, but he simply said, a young entrepreneur developed a new business and went into a community, and everyone in the community was very excited for him, very happy to have his business there. Um, but then the head of the police department came and said, "We so appreciate you being here. We love it that you're here. We welcome you. There's only one problem. You need to have security on your windows. You need to put the bars on your windows." And the entrepreneur said, "That is no problem, sir. Thank you for that." And so he put up the bars on his windows. And then the next day, the fire department chief came in and said, "We're so happy to have you here. We welcome your business. There's only one problem. You can't have bars on your windows." And that's welcome to Russia, right? That's the complex. It's so simple, but that's what you have to try and navigate, and in many of these countries around the world. And so that was really my first entry uh, to understand and manage no risks, whatever country you might go into. Venezuela was certainly another example where we, uh, both Conoco and Phillips, had been kicked out of Venezuela before, and we went back in, but we put in all these mitigants of exit arbitration and everything else. Um, and it was very well documented. And I felt that we were very well aligned with the government because we were putting in new technology. We were bringing in billions of dollars of revenue for the Venezuelan government. It seemed like we had great alignment. And yet, at the end, we were told no. Our assets were going to be taken out, and so that affects my risk view. So as you mentioned, when we spoke right after the president and his wife were removed from Venezuela, and there was a lot of excitement around, boy, this opens up Venezuela. And, my initial reaction was tap the brakes because the hydrocarbon laws haven't changed. And the laws 2 years from now, 4 years from now could change again. Even if they're changed today to welcome, uh, third parties back into the country, you know, from my board lens, I would be very cautious about committing people, resources, um, or any uh, large investments until
Yeah.
the situation became clear. So,
Yeah. That's very uh, helpful to hear your perspectives. And you mentioned a couple things in terms of the outlook, right? So things could look good today, or bad today, and could be very different in 3 or 4 years' time. From the board angle, the board lens, um, is that something that you ask management teams about in terms of what are the scenarios? Because we do a lot of work, as you know, on scenarios for countries' development and the investment environment for oil and gas and mining companies. What might things look like in 3 years' time? And some of the interesting work we've been doing recently highlights that you can have, for example, two countries that seem to be in a very similar place today in terms of the investment environment, but the forward trajectories are very different. Is that something that as a board member you're also focused on?
you try and do your best to get an understanding of it. Um, you know, I always worry about the things that we don't know that we don't know. And I've been on the TC Energy board, used to be TransCanada, for about a decade now. And uh, there had never been a pipeline that had gone through an environmental study and passed the environmental study that hadn't gone forward. So the company was very comfortable taking that regulatory risk
Hmm.
and invested multiple $1 billion in the Keystone XL pipeline. And obviously, a change of administration came, and those billions of dollars of investments just evaporate. And then another change of in the presidency 4 years later, and then we started to reinvest more money, and then another change in president, and we have it's very top of mind, and it should be top of mind. And I think it's a blind spot. As I think about the role of a board, you have to get the CEO right. That's the most important thing. The next thing is you're responsible for the strategy of the company, and that strategy of the company certainly has to take in your assessment of risks about where you're going to allocate your capital. So capital allocation is the output of your strategy discussion. And then the third area is that you are the fiduciary responsibility. You have that responsibility for your shareholders. And so how do you manage that fiduciary responsibility? Well, certainly the number one thing, you go back to the CEO and management. There has to be a high level of trust between the CEO, management, and the board. There has to be transparency, and trust. But you also have other tools, right? You have your internal auditors to make sure that your risks are being managed. You have your external auditors. You have banks that have their own interests at heart in making sure that risks are being managed. But I think there are some other risks that are outside those traditional risks, um, that a good enough job of managing, and we've talked about those quite a bit. Certainly, one that has come up recently, uh, in the past few years, is the cybersecurity risks. Uh, Fairly new now, artificial intelligence risks. And are companies really prepared? Do they really understand it? Well, typically, you have to get outside help to manage those areas because you're not going to have an expertise inside the company to really fully understand and manage those risks. And I would say political risk fits into that same vein, that you simply don't know what you don't know. And as you are thinking about making investments, as you're thinking about, in the nature of our business, are very long term investments. And so uh, that's where I'm I'm always concerned we don't know what we don't know, and we need to get some assistance. So I consider myself kind of a very optimistic skeptic, but I think all board members have to be a little bit skeptical when you're making major investment decisions, um, that are intended to last for decades.
Very interesting. Thank you, John. Um, when you think about the work that Horizon Engage does, and you've used us, as a provider when you were in your various positions at the different companies, and now as a senior advisor on our advisory board. I know you read a lot of our um, analytical pieces that come out. You just responded to one this morning, which I appreciated, with some follow up questions. How did those concise sort of executive analyses, uh, uh, d- how do you interpret them? How do, for example, the one on Iran that we sent out this morning, um, how do you incorporate that into your thinking?
So I think that uh, it probably, once again, what lens are you looking through? And uh, I think that certainly if you're looking it through it for, I thought of this morning on the one Iran is how does a trader how does a trader think of this? Is this apocalyptic, or is this the greatest thing that they've ever seen? Right? Is it a trader's paradise or trader's nightmare? And so that's one lens. I used to run the commercial group for ConocoPhillips, and how do you think about uh, how the flows of global energy are going to be impacted today, tomorrow, over the weekend, next week, next month. And so that's just one lens. The other is, how are my investments going to be impacted by this? Are they temporarily adjusted? Are they, permanently adjusted? And so I think that's where, uh, you know, that's one interesting aspect, is that kind of your team is on the ground every day trying their best to provide every insight possible to the CEOs, to the managers of different divisions of these companies, and to people like me who just are looking at it from more of a 10,000 to 30,000 foot area. I think, that's one aspect. The other thing that certainly I've enjoyed over time is your team, all the important people of every country on both sides of the aisle, and uh, who you should talk to, how you should deal with people. I think that's an important aspect. Should you partner with someone who's a good partner, who may not be the best partner? Uh, I think you're you're just in-depth knowledge, experience, expertise on all the above ground risks and how you can navigate those. Uh, you know, you've had that for a long time. Some of the new tools you've introduced, country comparisons, etc. I think those are just more you know more arrows in your quiver to look at how do you analyze if you're the head of E&P for a business, if you're in the refining business, if you're in the mining business, how do you navigate through um, all of this very complicated world that it can change in a minute, right? Uh, Obviously, your guys' intelligence, you were putting out weeks in advance on here's here's kind of the warning signals that a strike may be imminent, and then here's the impact. And companies have these enterprise risk management programs. Every good company has a
Yep.
good enterprise risk management program, and they have people looking at these risks. But you usually don't look at black swan risks and these external threats and risks. Those are listed for sure by companies, and there'll be somebody reporting on that, and they'll report out to their top management, and they'll report out to the board, usually quarterly or at least annually. Um, but I don't know that people are looking at these risks daily, like you guys are. And so, very long winded way of saying that I find these alerts very, very useful and informative because it causes me to think. And that may be the best single thing that it does, is it causes me to think about things and be curious about things and ask more questions.
Thank you, John. That's really greatly appreciated. Um, Maybe just one more question for you before we wrap up, and this is something that our team has been thinking a lot about over the last couple of years. Is we would often be approached by our clients when they were looking at a new jurisdiction, thinking about new country entry. As you mentioned, considering different partners for a new project, or bringing partners in, farming in new players, and wanting to get a sense of what's that jurisdiction like, or are these folks that we would want to do business with. But recently, we've been working with clients to help them ensure that they are also implementing protective measures for their existing business, to ensure that there are no unexpected um, either political actors, or there's no unexpected political interference to disrupt, which is one of their key business activities. Or, for example, in the lead up to a new deal, an M&A deal, or an agreement with the government, to make sure that they have fully protected um, the investment that they've put in making that new transaction happen. Is that something that you've seen companies do in the past? And if it is, I'm curious to hear about your experience. And if it's not, is that something that makes sense to you?
Yeah, I think once again, it's critical everywhere. It's certainly critical in the primary countries of my concern right now, which is Canada, the United States, and Mexico.
Hmm.
But it's critical everywhere, and that's about the importance of these relationships and building relationships. And I also think it's important. This is just something that I've always really strongly believed in is, you know, make sure you're aligned um, with what is best for everyone. And it's certainly why I had early concerns. The old ConocoPhillips, I can tell you, we would never approve a project that required government subsidies. Just as an example, if it was not economic without the subsidies, we just wouldn't approve it. When I was on the Phillips 66 board and management made a recommendation to convert one of the most sophisticated refineries in the world in California into a renewable diesel
Hmm.
facility, um, I told them that I'd never been prouder and I'd never been more concerned because when your feedstock costs are a multiple of your finished product, you know, and you're making a couple $1 billion investment on top of that, that causes me a lot of heartache. Um, and so that misalignment uh,
Mm.
of natural interest concern me. Now, obviously, California has taken a very strong stance that they want to move on to renewables, all sorts of California incentives, federal incentives, um, but not all those have come to fruition. And so that project has struggled. I still think ultimately it was the right decision, the right thing to do. But but it just underscores the importance of really understanding all aspects and all sides of um, every person's perspective. Certainly, when you're in um, regulated businesses.
Very helpful. Thank you so much, John, for joining us. And please tune in next time. We're going to be having regular podcasts now going forward. And so very much appreciate you joining.